Okay, Parry, you're set. Shall we get started?
Yeah, all set, all set.
Okay. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the webinar on business models for digital publishers. We have with us Parry Ravindranathan. Parry is the CEO and co-founder of a fintech startup called Converj. He is a global executive and an angel investor, and was until recently the president and managing director of Bloomberg Media, overseeing its international operations, everything outside of North America. Prior to taking over the global role, he was the managing director of Asia for Bloomberg Media, where he oversaw rapid expansion of its business, making it among the dominant news media companies in the region. Before Bloomberg, he worked with Al Jazeera, Network 18, and CNN in various roles. He also serves on the board of digital media company Asiaville and is a co-founder and fintech of the fintech innovation startup called ValueStat. Welcome, Parry. Glad to have you on board.
Thank you very much, Chirdeep. Thank you.
So in today's webinar, this is mainly, I'll actually dive right in. This is about the article that you had written on BQ Prime, I think a few weeks ago, the media hamster wheel. And that our attention, we saw that doing the rounds in a lot of these media WhatsApp and Telegram groups about the interesting concept of what you've spoken about, people pivoting from ads to subscriptions. And now we're seeing that like the likes of Netflix are pivoting back to the ads part of it, right? Subscriptions tapering down, right? So we want to talk about this and see, are there any other emerging business models that digital media companies can look into? But before we get started, I wanted to understand, how did digital media even land here? We see print and broadcast doing pretty well on ads, but digital media is really struggling to keep up with revenue in terms of ads. So how did the industry even land up here?
So, I started my career, believe it or not, as right out of college, I joined a company called India.com. I don't know if any of you guys will remember. It's most famous, not for its product, most famous for its advertising, which was a big red dot that they had bought on Times of India at that time. It was a big ad campaign. Now, I remember those days when, there was a lot of hope in advertising, digital advertising, etc. But one of the things that one of the reasons that digital advertising it's still sort of stuck in that limbo, at least in India, is because the early sort of entrance of it were newspapers, etc., who kind of opened their digital arm. Now, they didn't look at their digital arm as big money spinners. They looked at more or less as presence, right? They had to sort of just tell the world that we are present here. I remember one newspaper story that when you really perform badly, they sent you to the internet department. That's kind of how they looked at the internet. So I think because it was just a sort of, because the newspapers, TV was much later, but newspapers were really growing. Newspapers continue to grow. They thought that this was just something that was just a sideshow, and maybe at some point will start making money. So they start throwing that entire thing free. So what you and I bought for 6 rupees at that time, a newspaper, they were throwing the entire thing free on the internet, right? Completely not at all thinking that at some point, someone's going to turn around and say, why should I pay for this when I'm getting everything there, right? So, and that's exactly what happened. You saw a flip, because most mediums, they don't, the growth is not everlasting. You saw it in print. When TV came, everyone said this is the next big frontier. When TV started growing, and then once TV also reached its plateau. I think it's still not reached its complete plateau in India because of sport, but essentially you reached a point where digital continues to grow and outgrow everyone else, right? So no, I don't think anyone 20 years ago, could foresee that it was all sort of going to be charged. It's something you can make money out of. And now it's inverted. Now everything is stalled. All growth in every other sort of medium is stalled. Almost the only other growing medium is digital, and digital ads and subscriptions. But by that time, you've already lost, because you gave it free for so long, you essentially lost your pricing power on digital by logic. And so now you're trying to recover that pricing power in whatever way you can, and that's a big challenge. So it is I think the industry has kind of dug its own hole over time. And look, I'm not pretending that any of us are sort of absolved of that blame. But it was an early strategy that everyone kind of did it. I mean, there were early entrants who tried to monetize it. I mean, I worked for TV18 many years ago. Network 18, had Money Control. It kind of created its own bouquet of digital properties, which are still very successful. But their whole aim was to monetize. They had their own subscriptions models. They tried new subscriptions models. There are plenty of people who experimented, but the big, large players, or at least the newspaper players who were sort of taking their brand online, essentially gave it all for free, and that spoiled the market, in my view. It spoiled the market very early in its growth, and then everything else has been a sort of catch up for the entire industry.
Is there a way out of this, or is it just a race to the bottom that ads are never going to make money for digital media?
Yeah, I mean, I actually, I don't believe there is this loss of hope. I do believe that eventually this will have to stabilize, right? We have hit bottom. I mean, I don't know whether there's any bottom below this, but we're kind of going underground after this. Because what's happened is the whole ecosystem has changed. There aren't many big businesses left that the newspapers' growth has stalled. TV growth has stalled, cable TV growth has stalled. The whole universe has changed to an extent that now you don't have a choice but to make money on digital. It's a question of survival. Now, when it's a question of survival, you do I think change the way you kind of work. You do try and get better pricing, etc. I do think that it'll stabilize. One good example I think I can give you is in sport, the digital rights for IPL went for a gigantic sum. Now, just for that alone, for them to recover it, whoever won it, recover it, they need to be able to raise the bar. And I do believe that will allow the industry to pull the entire industry's basically digital ad pricing up with it. Because sport is expensive. Sport is extremely expensive anywhere in the world, by the way. I always call it the last bastion of cable TV. If sport moved entirely off cable TV will die. In the US, it's almost entirely true. And tomorrow, that moves off, it's essentially die as a platform. So I think because these ad rates go up, because they have to kind of justify it, they will pull the entire universe up with it. I think that's what I believe is going to happen eventually. So there is more than hope. I think there's potentially a growth sort of up ahead of us for digital media.
So very similar to what happened with telecom industry recently, like everybody started raising their rates because it was pretty much bottom to get subscribers on board.
Exactly.
Then they realized that there's not going to be any profits towards the end of it.
Right? Exactly. Yeah, everyone dies, right? It's not just one person. Everyone dies if you continue, because there is no path where one survives and others don't, because the pricing is for everyone. I mean, you see it in pretty much across the board. Of course, there will be more and more consolidation, but after the consolidation, some of them will, some of them will survive.
Yeah, and if you were to talk about the actual rate, and very few people talk about numbers in terms of programmatic ads, right? So if I were a medium or a large size publisher that's or even starting up on a publication system right now, the CPMs that you get in India are very low. Maybe a national media English daily kind of thing would probably get you a 20 to 25 rupee CPMs at best. And if you're looking at regional with a very local presence, you're probably surviving with maybe 4 or 5 rupee CPMs. It's as low as that. So something like this, when you're looking at the numbers like that, it doesn't make sense to create content at all, because you're never going to catch up. So in this case, do you see this India, as the GDP per capita grows, do you see the ad rates also going up? Is this something that would happen naturally?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's GDP related in my personal view. It is more the market related. In terms of a market that already exists, like in India, like I said, I think when you think sport, for instance, the CPMs will go up. The economics of sport is essentially, when I say sport, it's essentially cricket in India. The economics of cricket has changed so much that it has to catch up. So along with that, you will see everyone else seeing a catch up. Now, will it? So in places like the US, it is caught up years ago. And I think I mentioned it to you. And this is public knowledge. It's not me revealing anything new. But for Bloomberg, when I was running Bloomberg outside of the US, essentially it had digital revenue had crossed TV years ago. I mean, we had publications and as well as TV at the time. They had crossed it years ago. It was a much larger piece of our portfolio. Even today, my former colleague Scott Havens just a few days ago, they saw 30% growth in, more than 30% growth in digital, but everything else is kind of 1 or 2%, 3%, 4%. So you've already seen that crossover in the rest of the developed world. I mean, in revenue terms itself, right? I don't think that's happened in India yet. I don't think I don't think it's even comparable to the established mediums today, where digital has not crossed over in any of the big established players. It has not crossed over. But I do think that is the way forward, because everything else is stalled. I think digital continues to grow as your audience is growing, your viewership is growing, and CPMs are not growing fast enough. But essentially, you're still seeing digital-led growth. If you take it only as revenue, as top-line revenue, you're seeing growth. Eventually, the economics will have to catch up. Now, how long that will take? It is still, the jury is still out there. And what will it take to get it there? I think it is a realization within the entire market that this, internet, whatever is online, isn't free. It is essentially, there's a cost attached to it, and those costs have come down, as we discussed. Chirdeep, you were asking that before. The cost of production has come down dramatically. Even for things like video, has essentially plummeted, because you can do it you don't need the huge beta cams, etc., that everyone used to use on TV. When we started our careers, you can use just a phone. So the cost of production has come down, but it's still the gap is way too large for it to actually be a growth growth instrument in your arsenal, basically.
Got it. And is there a parallel that you can draw from anywhere else in the world? Has US seen rates being very low initially and then climbing up? Is there an example where the publishing industry has got together to go after, like, big tech? Today, big tech is eating all of news media lunch, right? So news media is pretty much either reliant on direct brand partnerships, which take a long time to get done, or reliant on programmatic advertisement if you're pretty small. And programmatic advertisement is really the bottom of the barrel in terms of rates. Is there any example of publishers coming together anywhere in the world saying that, okay, we will start increasing the rates and we will not just go after cannibalize each other?
So one good thing, Chirdeep, is that we are living in a time where in the last year, last 6-7 months, tech is seeing, for the first time, tech is seeing their own lunch being eaten, right? We are seeing that for the first time, like a Meta, you guys have seen it, Meta's own earnings and everything else. You're seeing a sudden slowdown on their ad growth. It could be various reasons. The Android and Apple essentially putting restrictions on targeting, etc., is one of the reasons. Data privacy has become much more important sort of part of our discussion and part of business, which means that you can't target ads the way you used to. So for once in our journey, it is essentially our lunch is not being eaten, their lunch is being eaten for a change, right? That's great. As media, we should always celebrate it. But the thing is, when I started out, you were dependent for a lot of things. You were dependent on distribution on these social media platforms, etc. I think that has changed a bit. So I do think that in the US, you're seeing that is mature to a point where publishers are being able to stand up and say that they can grow on their own. And we're seeing this even in independent media. Forget the large, big networks or the big media companies like New York Times, because their dynamics are a bit different. But even the smaller players, you're seeing an Axios make $100 million within 4 years of their existence, and then getting sold for $500 million within 5 years of their existence is essentially a huge that's a huge leg up for media, right? Or Politico, which is an even bigger animal, got sold for $1 billion. There are these, and my former boss, Justin Smith, just moved out of Bloomberg and started Semaphore, which is which is his own new startup in media. So you're seeing a lot of sort of activity in the mature markets, largely because I think the market is matured and you can actually the rates and everything else are now mature enough for you to be able to make money out of it. So I think eventually it'll hit here as well. It's taken longer than I sort of expected. About 4 years ago, I said in a conference that it will mature, and it's still not. So and maybe the pandemic kind of didn't help, but I'm hoping that the next time I speak to someone 3 years down, 2 years down, it is reached a point of maturity where it is. So it is. I mean, I think the developed markets had a very different kind of growth trajectory till about 2015, end of 2015. I think I'd given you an example. You could see that almost all the big media companies were in doldrums. They were trying to figure out how to survive. There was a whole new generation of media companies like Vice, Vox, which came about and said that the old media companies don't know what they're doing. We know what we're doing. And that's the distributed media sort of revolution, right? And now that distributed media is kind of dead. Vice is essentially, is in its own trouble. But now there's a huge, jump back to what it was, into the base things that advertising and subscriptions, etc. So where all of those old players that everyone called, sort of obsolete, have suddenly come back because their credibility, etc., are appealing to an audience.
And you spoke about, actually, I want to catch up on what you mentioned about Meta. So everybody's talking about the metaverse. Everybody is going to be talking about news in the metaverse. Nobody's doing that yet. I think that we hardly know anybody who's doing that. But I think what we see this again is big tech is jumping ahead and capturing that part of the universe and probably getting the ad space as well out there. And traditional media is not yet even looking at this space. Is this going to be, again, we're too slow into entering things like
No, I think the metaverse is a bit different, I think. I don't think everyone's jumped into that bandwagon. It came from one guy's head, essentially. And whatever we have seen so far isn't impressive. It looks like a third tier video game. If you guys play video games, it's like really, really bad video games. I don't think I've seen anything there that kind of that is a big threat to the way we are running media companies at the moment. I think it's in my personal view, and this is a personal view. So the thing is, it's actually a threat to Meta's own existence if they don't pull it off. They've hitched their wagon onto something that no idea what it is. They're kind of it just seems very floozy and kind of they had to come with a narrative. And no matter what, anyone who tells me, I've been in media long enough to know, and I play video games, so long enough that they are not matched up on that. At least they don't match up at the moment, right? Now that could change. I'm not saying that won't, but that could change. But at the moment, it seems like it's in someone's head, and I think it needs to. Like Google hasn't gone and put all their money into that basket, or Apple hasn't done it. If all of them do it, they're seeing something that we aren't. But the very fact that only one player has done it, and frankly, that one player, to be slightly blunt about it, has essentially sort of acquired themselves into leadership position, whether it's Instagram or WhatsApp or any of those. They've acquired themselves into it and not really produced their own thing, apart from the original Facebook itself, which itself came from iterations. But essentially, I don't think it's as big a threat to media for sure. And I don't think every media company should suddenly just decide they should have a metaverse department, because it's a lot of cost for pretty much nothing at the moment. You don't know it. And like I said before, I mean, we are living in a world, at least in India, where we just moved into 5G, right? I mean, when's the time when all this can take all the bandwidth to be in a sort of virtual world? I think it's a few years away. So I wouldn't go and put all my money in right now when all that is just looking pretty fuzzy, I think.
Okay.
I'm not dismissing it entirely, but it's just, well, okay, fine. I am dismissing it.
Yeah, it's probably a few years away, but let's see how that goes.
Yeah.
So moving on with related to the article, you had mentioned the more media changes, the more it stays the same. There are mainly two business models out here: subscriptions or ads. And we've spoken about ads so far. Hopefully things will get better when publishers get together out here. Now let's focus on subscriptions, right? So we see the likes of Netflix, who've been mainly running only subscriptions and been very vocal saying that they will be only subscriptions and never look at ads. And now jumping on the ad bandwagon, trying to see how they can bring a lower price product into the market subsidized with ads, right?
Yeah.
So, at the same time, we also see subscriptions. Everybody who started with a subscription product saw phenomenal growth in the first few years, but now we see everyone having a plateau, right? It's tapering off. It's not that exponential or the linear graph at all. It is getting to be a flattened curve towards the top. Is this something that you're seeing across the world? Is this something that you're seeing across industries as well?
I think it is. So Netflix is a very good example because Netflix saw its plateau after reaching 220 million subs, right? So I think everyone ends up, when you kind of look at a business plan, and I've done so many of them, you kind of look at as sort of, a populace and say all of them are going to subscribe to us, right? That is the universe that we want to subscribe to us. Like, the New York Times has sort of planted a flag and said our universe is 100 million, right? Semaphore, my former boss, Justin, who's a brilliant guy, who's sort of said their universe is about 200 million. You kind of count your universe as the readership on it, which is all, which is obviously the most optimistic view of what that universe looks like. Now, 2 years ago, I had written a piece for Bloomberg Quint itself, which was on a subscription equilibrium, right? And I do believe there's a subscription equilibrium for each one of us. And in that equilibrium, in that world, we are our competitors, and the competitors to publishers are not just other publishers. And that's a mistake. Most publishers end up looking at other publishers as their competitors. No. Much like Netflix said their competitor was sleep. A long time ago, very famously, Reid Hoffman had said, my competition is sleep. It's not, actually, it's Disney Plus. But anyway, let's call it sleep at that time. But very similarly, I think our competitor, every app on your phone is essentially a competitor in the subscription world. Every app which you pay for, from LinkedIn, from all those food apps that you kind of have, which you're taking pros, all of them are essentially part of your subscription sort of thing. I mean, I put in that piece, I had written that I put $100, say, put an imaginary figure of $100 as, say, my subscription equilibrium, right? That's where it hits $100 and I say, okay, fine, I probably won't it's not, I'm not going to do it more of those. But essentially, everyone has that at some point where you reach that point where I cannot subscribe to more things, which means that you kind of reach a point where you have two publications, two or three entertainment, because entertainment is the one bit that everyone makes a sort of flexibility. You got, Lord of the Rings in Amazon. You got sort of House of Dragon and Hotstar, so you need both, right? So you kind of, and then in this Netflix, something you like in Netflix. So you kind of have three, but you kind of get to a point where you cannot subscribe to more, and that is the biggest threat to a publication. So that is where you kind of hit and then say, okay, that's where growth is limited. By the way, Netflix hit that, and they essentially decided ads is where they're going to go, despite the fact that just 3 years ago, and I think I wrote that in that piece that you mentioned, where 3 years ago, Reid Hoffman said they don't see themselves getting into ads ever. But now they've kind of had to reverse that because they've hit that equilibrium. And I think all publications are going to hit it very soon. And that equilibrium for most publications is not going to be 200 million. I wish, but it's not. But it's going to be, New York Times, for instance, saw growth from, say, 1.5, 1.6 million million subscribers in 2015 to end of 2015 to about 10 million today. That includes their acquisitions, but essentially 10 million today. 10 million is a huge number for a publication, right? Now, I don't know if that 10 is 100. It could be because it's New York Times. But if it is, it'll be among the 1 or 2 apps that I was just talking to you about that will be in your publisher list by 100 million people, right? So that's how you should look at it. So when I look at publications and the subscription strategy, and if I were still running a media company, and you could in the first, who knows, would have a media presence, I would always look at it as you competing against each and every app on your mobile phone. I look at all of them as competition. So I do think that it will hit. The publication subscriptions are still too small to actually be able to have hit the limit yet. And we don't know what that limit is. It may be fictional. We know that Netflix limit is 220 million. They're saying, okay, fine, 220 million. This is where we're hitting it. It looks like Disney Plus is going to hit that. We have not yet seen what that limit is. Who sets the limit? I think it's going to be New York Times who's going to set that limit of 10 million, 12 million, 13 million, whatever that limit is. And then you'll see slowdown in their growth. And that will be the sign that that's the limit that a publication can reach. I don't think we have hit that limit, but we will. We will soon. We're going to have the same problem that Netflix and entertainment has, because in entertainment, it is in sport, entertainment, etc. There's a need for it. There are cycles. There's something like Lord of the Rings is an example. You might want to subscribe to it for a while, and then it might see a dip. And on sport, Hotstar, once IPL is off that chart, the next IPL will be a big test for Hotstar, whether they manage to retain their numbers. My guess is not. And that's a limit that they have set for themselves. Right? That's their limit. So you're going to see it in every industry. And I think publication you're already seeing in publication, because end of the day, how much utility does a news product give you is a big factor in what you subscribe to and don't subscribe to, or at least cancel a subscription to.
Yeah. And just parallel to that, I think we're seeing very similar story play out in India, right? So a lot of them, I think a lot of the publishers actually went down the subscription model. Particularly, it starts off with the financial news sites across the world. They're the first ones to go behind a paywall, because
utility.
People pay for the content. And then over a period of time, you'll see more of these niche publications going behind a paywall, or at least going with a part paywall strategy, which is maybe 70% of your content is free, but 30% is behind a paywall.
Yeah.
And we see that subscriptions are plateauing on these platforms as well. But one model that we are seeing emerge of late is bundling of subscriptions together. I think, I'm not sure if this is right, but I think Business Standard gives you a Wall Street Journal subscription, and same thing with Bloomberg. Quint was giving you a Bloomberg subscription, or allowed to read a lot of articles there. Do you see this bundling of subscriptions as the next big thing? Because you're right on the subscription equilibrium, that people don't have too much money to spend, or wouldn't budget so much money to spend on paying for content. But if I could pay for one subscription and probably get 5 different publications on my app, that would make sense for me. Yeah.
So just before that, I'll just quickly qualify the B2B, the niche ones that you mentioned. You're absolutely bang on the niche ones. In fact, I think the niche ones are the ones that have grown the most in subscriptions. I mean, there are so many B2B publications in B2B sort of publications, quasi B2C publications like Skift, etc., which has grown like crazy in the US. And they maintain they've kind of created very robust businesses. And that's because of utility value. Utility value for niche, the more niche you are, the utility is higher, right? Hoarding key for watches, key for travel. There's so many others, those niche ones which have grown and actually built new revenue models onto them. There's e-commerce attached to it and doing very well, which we can come to later. But to your question on bundling, the biggest challenge in bundling, and most of the examples you have given in bundling, the challenge is one player is the principal. In India, specifically, the problem is regulation. Like, none of these guys have their own gigantic presence in India because regulation doesn't allow certain things. So they have to partner with someone. When they partner, they have to lower their cost. And that cost is essentially what's going to, that it's defined by the Indian partner, right? So that doesn't work out very well for whoever the other partner is, right? It doesn't work very well because you're not making that much money out of it. You're making a lot less money than say you make anywhere else. I mean, I can tell you for most international publications that would be the case. But even then, even assume that that is not the case and it's all equal relationships, the bundling part of it, whoever bundles it has the big advantage of it, because clearly the reason they are bundling under them is because they're a bigger brand than the others. So their brand value is the one that's just driving the bundling, right? And I think it just doesn't, I don't think the math, if you really divide it according to the thing, because even in a bundling thing, you're severely discounting. In that discounted sort of world, I don't think that actually works out very well for all players involved. including the one who's bundling, because I don't think it actually really works out. And we have seen many of this come and go. There are plenty of bundles that have come and gone. I don't mean bundling by say a Condé Nast bundling all their products. That the math is great because they know how the math works out. Or Bloomberg, for instance, bundling all their products, quick take, everything bundled into one product. That's a different thing. But I'm talking about sort of bundling by sort of disparate brands with each other because you can sort of piggyback on someone else's brand power. I think it only works out for the guy whose brand power is being used. It never, if at all. And it certainly doesn't work for the ones that are below that. I think everyone tries it. I've tried it many times. Where you are bundling. When I was Bloomberg, do you try and see if you can bundle other ones? I just don't think it works out for anyone. The economics are sort of vague and you sort of, if you have competing products inside, and most publications have, say a general news publication is bundling a pure tech sort of bundle. General news product will also have their own tech product inside, because how can you run today you cannot escape it. It's just too much of sort of too much conflict there, which makes it very difficult for everyone to make money in the piece. I'm yet to see a fully bundled product that is bundling various brands who are not owned by them being very successful. I'm yet to see it. And again, like I said, I mean, I may be wrong, and there may be a math that I'm not seeing. But if you really look at it from the big brand or from the small perspective, you don't really see a cohesive way to do it, I think.
Okay. We've spoken about ads, we've spoken about subscriptions. They are the dominant business models out here. But we see a few emerging right now, right? So want to touch upon some of them as well. So live commerce is making a lot of noise across the world, particularly in China, where it started off with.
Yeah.
Just 2 days back, we heard Amazon India is introducing live commerce. Right? Is this limited to retail only? Is this going to be something like a very niche fashion magazine can introduce live commerce on their site or their app?
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think a niche product, a fashion magazine, a watch magazine for holding keys, etc. They all have potential to use this in a significant way, and you're seeing it. It's growing. It's growing across the board. There are apps like Firework which essentially help a publication integrate video and live commerce or a live commerce stream, and there are plenty of players in the space as well which do it. And so you are seeing that you are able to do it. The challenge for news is the audience part, right? For Amazon, it makes 100% sense. They've got the reach, they got users, they got Prime users, etc. Makes 100% sense. There's no editorial imperative of any kind that comes in between. It's you can do it. You allows your creator to basically sell your space. If you're a company, you can do that the same way. But and the better the content, you're able to sell it. I mean, I don't think we have reached a point where the absolutely right kind of content is actually being served for live commerce, but we'll get there because content evolves over time, and the more mature it becomes, it'll evolve. And TikTok has also been doing this live commerce for a while. I mean, they've been experimenting with it. Absolutely the best platform to do live commerce, right? Because it's essentially feed led. But I think for news product, I think it is slightly more complicated, however big a brand you are. Because contextual sort of programmatic contextual sort of live feeds, probably there is a way of doing it, but you could always have mishaps where there's a big bomb blast that you're essentially covering, and right below it you're selling something. Those things happen even on just plain vanilla ads, and imagine what it could be in a live commerce scenario. That's even worse, right? So I think it's a bit more, it's a bit harder. I won't say it's not possible. I can see, big media news companies which have verticals of like tech and all sorts of things being able to do it, being able to sort of bring that onto their feeds. But on the main sort of news, this thing, it's a slightly harder one to do. But I'm sure technology will evolve and you're able to actually contextualize and do it over time. But yes, I think live commerce is it's going to, I think it's going to be a very small piece of the revenue for the foreseeable future. But for niche products, I think it would probably be a potentially a very large source of business over the next few years. But yeah, it's still too small. But it's a good, I'm very bullish on and live commerce as an overall tool in different scenarios, including media. And I think it will eventually at some point have its impact, but I don't know how large. It's still very early.
Yeah. Do you know any magazines, anything to do with travel or entertainment or fashion? Anybody who's doing this so far?
So I've seen commerce, right? I've seen very successful sort of integration of commerce, e-commerce into media platforms. Like I gave an example of Hodinky, which does watches. Very successful integration of going from an antique seller. Basically, they were doing antique reviews. They started with reviews of watches and selling antiques. Then you're able to sell your antique on it, and to actually being a watch retailer, almost like a watch retailer. You're already seeing it, right? They've already done it. There's a big church and street, church and sort of thing divide, where the editorial sort of keeps it separate and saying, and they've kind of pulled it off in a lot of ways. And there are, when I was at Bloomberg, we have experimented with some of those things as well. And I do think that Bloomberg's a very good example of someone who can try it. The divide between church and state is very, very rigid, and so they'll probably do it well. New York Times has experimented with e-commerce I would say fairly successfully with their Wirecutter referral programs, their referral affiliate marketing things, which I think they've again sort of put a Chinese wall, because again, most of these brands, they depend on the credibility is the most important thing. The brand credibility is the most important thing. And so around that, if you kind of piggyback these attached to it without sort of in any way muddying the credibility, there is a business to be done. I don't see many live commerce hugely successful cases in media. Plenty of cases in the retail world. There are sort of retail chains doing it, etc., all trying that out and actually making impact. I think if you guys have obviously Firework is a good example, because they're doing it quite successfully in the US with a lot of brands like that. But I do think that will become more and more common, because it's next natural evolution of e-commerce, from a plain vanilla way of buying to actually more immersive way of buying. And who knows, this could be the start of a slightly even more immersive way of getting in e-commerce, I think. So yeah.
You also mentioned, you briefly touched upon affiliate marketing, and that's something that we're seeing taking shape across media organizations, because it pays better than the CPMs on ad inventory that's sold.
Yeah.
Particularly the Wirecutter and even just Amazon affiliate program, right? So it seems to be paying slightly better. So what has been your experience? Have you seen anything apart from the large publications doing affiliate marketing? Is there an idea of share of revenue that they could be getting?
So I haven't seen that much affiliate marketing led sort of thing. It is outside of the New York Times and the big ones, basically the big publishers. Partly one of the reasons is that you have to be very choosy about, you have to pay attention to it. Right? You cannot keep it. The biggest challenge with something is you got to pay attention to what your brand is being affiliated with, basically, or being associated with, right? Which a Wirecutter or New York Times or the big publications are very wary of that. They want to be associated with things that they actually think that can, there is a sort of brand match. And I do think that no one's really done that hard enough on a brand match with your brand. So the sort of retailing only things or referring only things that actually have some sort of brand match to you. It is, whenever we have seen e-commerce, is usually just a spray of e-commerce. You see any of those many news sites, and I won't name them not to embarrass them. You see a lot of them, someone selling, I don't know, it could be anything, right? There's so many things being sold nowadays. You open any website, and they're saying it's there on the website, but they're not referring to it, but it's there. People are buying it, etc. So that's the challenge of e-commerce. I think you got to be, if you are really brand conscious, if you're very conscious of your own brand, you got to be very, very conscious of what is being sold on your brand. using your brand or on your brand. And I don't think we have reached that part yet in India where people are doing it. And I do think it'll evolve. All these are, you got to be really, really careful about your brand. I think that's something that not everyone is, unfortunately. But I do think that that's what's going to happen eventually.
Yeah, so we know a couple of startups in that area who are working on things which are going to give you a shopping cart kind of experience on the site. The biggest problem that news publishers have today is that when you make an e-commerce transaction, you go out of sight and you lose the audience. So companies like ShopType, Zeko, all of them are cart on your site itself and helping. But you're right, which is the brand that affiliates or goes along with the content. It's, I think, a lot of work for them to sit and.
If I were a publisher, if I'm a publisher running the thing, that would be something I'll be paranoid about. I think people don't give enough credit to their own brand value sometimes. I would be paranoid about what that is. I would choose, what is the kind of stuff you do. And all that will incredibly, I think, increase, one, the actual take rate on these things, and two, increase your own credibility, which gives you enough power to be able to recommend or refer. Which is, I think, I don't think people spend enough time on it, I think.
Yeah. Great. I think that pretty much brings us to the end of the questions. That, as tradition goes, I have to ask you a question about Web3.
Yeah.
Because nobody's playing around with that in news space. Of course, there's the NFT and all of that that's happening, but it's so small yet. Do you see any future with crypto and Web3 coming into media for monetization purposes?
See, there are quite a few media companies experimenting with it globally, right? And some of it successfully. New York Times did this famous thing on doing that art, sort of making an NFT of an article and sold it for $600,000. It was an experiment. They admitted it was an experiment. I think more seriously, there's Timing. My old colleague of mine, a close friend, Keith Grossman, who's the president of Timing. He's experimenting a lot. They're experimenting a lot with NFTs, with timepieces. They're doing all sorts of things in it, and fairly successfully, and making money out of it. Actually, it's an actual revenue stream for them, right? It's a proper, full-on revenue stream for them. In fact, they even hired their finance guy, who was expert on NFTs and cryptos, who could do both, in that world as well. So there is an actual investment going on into trying to sort of define what that means for media. I don't think it's entirely defined. Some of these guys are ahead of their time and trying to kind of define their own sort of thing, which might actually lay the template for the rest of the industry, which is why I admire them for doing it, because it is not an easy sort of thing to get your foot in and compete with everyone and kind of sort of wade through the bullshit. I think the problem is there's just so much of bullshit around all this. You got to be able to wade through it and be able to, sort of define what that means for our industry. I don't think it's fully defined, but I think everyone's trying to. It's still further away. And NFTs, I think a lot of people are experimenting with it, with movie stars doing it, and niche publications, some movie publications and those kind of things, guys doing it. But it's still nascent and small, and it goes through, some of these goes through its ups and downs, right? NFTs went through its real up with all these platforms, and then now it's kind of taken a sort of hit, and then eventually, the technology is out there. So if the technology is out there, something will be made out of it eventually. But I don't think it might not be anything that we see today that'll be the basis of what Web3 will look like in the next decade, basically.
Great, thanks, Parry. Thanks for those insightful points. I'd open it up for questions to all of the attendees. If you have any questions, please put it on the Q&A box, and we'll ask Parry the question there. So while we wait for questions, at closing point, do you see hope in a small publisher starting off today? If you're a general news publisher,
yeah. I think there are still areas that are not, fully sort of not just fully monetized, or monetized is probably a bad word, but essentially there's just many areas. So I would always, I welcome I would always welcome new publications coming out and trying new things, right? If they all try the same things that everyone else has done, they won't survive anything. But you need more media entrepreneurship, more publications, more sort of experimentation by different players. And I can name so many good new players, right, who have really made their mark on the Morning Context, Ken, News Minute, Quint itself, is a good example. Bloomberg Quint, which I was heavily part of, and I'm hugely proud of. Now BQ Prime. There are just so many new publications. Signal, there's just so many different kinds of publications that are trying new things. I think we need more of that, and not everyone is going to go through their own evolution. Not everyone will survive, etc. But I'm hopeful that there will be new and new things being tried and by many publications. So I do think that that's going to that I think I'm very, very hopeful, more than hopeful.
Okay, there is one question about memberships. Do you see memberships getting a boost due to the community aspect of Web3? So, for example, something like a token issued as a part of your subscription. So your value of the token increases as the subscribers on that platform increase. Is this something?
It's actually a very good question. In fact, I think it's membership has a better use for it than other ones, like other sort of things, because there is membership is a, the problem with the good part about membership, and there are some good examples, like Guardian is a good example, right? It's a very successful membership organization, right? It's done on memberships rather than subscriptions. It's a great example. Everything else is free. Whatever you see is free. I think there are some good examples, but yes, I do think that there is something there. I don't think anyone's cracked it, but there's something there using the token sort of thing. But acceptance is the problem for this. Would you or me accept taking a sort of small token created for memberships, a part token or full token, whatever it is? Would you do it or not? That acceptability is the piece that I think is still fairly nascent. But once that acceptance piece is sort of more sort of defined and more sort of mature, I think, yes, I think it is possibly one way of doing the membership part of it. But otherwise, membership is a tough business to be in, because it's kind of nearly charity driven or member, and it's a very unreliable form of revenue, in my view. And again, I hugely sort of admire a lot of companies who are doing it, which essentially is you're taking a stand saying your editorial is non-compromised in every way, and it's completely untouched by opinion, by sort of any pressure from advertisers or anyone else. But at the same time, as a revenue stream, it's a tough revenue stream. I think some have pulled it off. Some have become big enough brands to pull it off. Not everyone can. But yes, I think a token is a good. In fact, I've actually thought of that before on how to use tokens for some of these kind of things. And one of the use cases is for membership, which is essentially can you do that, because then you derive value out of it. The problem with membership is unless you derive value out of it, most people you're just sort of writing it off. You're just saying, I'm doing it for journalism, right?
Right.
There's only that much you can do for journalism, all the time, right? For any individual can do. So whereas this one, you kind of start creating value for whoever is, subscribing to it.
We have one question here, which says, for a small new publisher, what are the monetization models that you would suggest to generate some revenue? I'm guessing this is mainly depending on the type of publication. If you're very niche like the Ken, you'd probably go down the subscription model.
Subscription route, yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether any of them will go the advertising route, but because advertising, the moment you're behind a subscription thing, the good and bad is if it's a small number of subscribers, your advertising options are limited. If you have a very large number of subscribers, like the big publishers like Bloomberg's and the New York Times, you have a captive audience, you have a targeted audience, then you can really monetize even the ads. But if you're very small and you're starting out, I think you would always end up starting out as a subscription-led or an ad tier-led, which is this thing. But you got to have a very robust ad team which becomes harder to sing. And as we all discussed in this, ad sales, the pricing is way too low to be able to fully monetize it anyway. So the easiest way would be to start the subscription route and hope that or not hope, or create every new publication says their content is unique enough for people to sort of buy into. The biggest test is anyone subscribing to you. That's a test of how unique your content is or not. You'll get to know pretty quickly whether your content is unique enough for me to leave out another publication to kind of subscribe to you. And I think that's a big test, a big test.
Okay, I think that's pretty much it, Chad. So that's pretty much it, Parry. So thanks for the time here. And if any of you have any questions, please post it on Twitter, please post it on LinkedIn, and we'll be happy to answer that for you.
Thank you so much, guys. Thanks. It was fun.
Thank you.
Thank you.